Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells it all regarding family court, other court issues, as well as CPS. I'm your host, Marianne Petrie, and today I have a very special guest all the way from the United Kingdom. Her name is Janis James, and she's first and foremost a child safety campaigner and works very closely with the UK and Scottish governments. And they are evidence-based, gender-inclusive, and pragmatic, but not sensationalist. And she has found parental alienation is the biggest child protection scandal that she has ever encountered. Um, Good evening, Janis. How are you doing?
Good evening, Marianne. I'm very good, thank you. Hope you're well.
Oh, yes. I'm glad to have you on. So I'd like to learn more about your child safety campaign and how you feel about parental alienation and what's going on over there in the UK.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to speak about it. It's not actually just going on over the UK. The behaviours of what is effectively psychological child abuse that's referenced through parental alienation, which is a descriptive term, it is a global issue in so much that we've now aligned with 54 NGOs across 33 countries in 5 continents. It's an issue that affects everyone, and it's an issue which has been distorted and corrupted for different agendas that have nothing whatsoever to do with child protection. That's the reason we've got involved. We've spent a lifetime keeping children safe in home, in cars, and yet what we're watching and witnessing is the wholesale destruction of children's psychological health and well-being through the suppression of their attachment bonds with loved parents.
Mm-hmm. And you're seeing that in the courtrooms? Are you going into the courtrooms seeing this?
I don't personally, I'm a marketeer, although I have watched it in the courtrooms, having observed it closely in a former relationship, which is what brought me into this toxic rabbit space. And I'm grateful for the experience, although certainly not for the experience of the children who suffered from it, only because when I hear and see our ministers and our domestic abuse commissioners and our victims commissioners effectively saying that parental alienation or the behaviours of parental alienation don't exist, I know for a fact from my own experience that that is untrue, that that is false, because I watched it for 7 years, and that is what brought me into this space. I am a mum of 3, I'm a granny of 3, I love my kids, and I love working with kids. We do a lot of work in keeping children safe in home and cars, and witnessing the psychological decimation of 2 healthy, beautiful children filled me with horror. I didn't know what it was called, I didn't know what it was, but it was certainly not normative behaviour. And I committed our brand, Egg Safety CIC, we're a non-profit, gender inclusive, to helping raise visibility, to help victim parents and children by raising visibility in the public domain.
Mm-hmm. And this is something people really need to know about, but unfortunately they don't realize what this is until it happens to them.
That's right. It's fascinating and horrifying in equal measure. When I first started to research this effectively through Good Egg a couple of years ago, we decided to set up a task force of experts, because remember, I'm only a campaigner. I don't profess to be an expert in any of the campaigns that we launch, although I do my homework well, and I do a lot of research, and I'm interested in evidence-based solutions, because if you get the wrong problem, you can work and write the award-winning commercials, but it will be the right solution to the wrong problem, and it's destined for failure. And so I contacted lots of experts and had them around my table, and 2 of them actually in the research side, I wanted them to help us with our research, actually were suffering from it. One was a mum And I rang and said, do you know what parental alienation is? You may not have heard of it. And she took a deep intake of breath and said, Jan, I not only know it, I'm actually experiencing it with a 5-year-old daughter and her ex-partner. You know, Mummy, why don't you cook better? Mummy, why don't you iron my clothes better? Mummy, I'm not sure if I want to see you again. And then the second was actually a researcher who burst into tears, an adult male who burst into tears and apologized and said, actually, this happened to me when I was a child, when I was 7. You know, I didn't see my father for years and I didn't realize what it was. And that was uniquely heartbreaking because he'd never actually recognized it until I was articulating it. So I think that's the issue, isn't it? It's about raising visibility in the public so people can firstly recognize what's happening to them, because it challenges your sanity when you're actually in that space. And also for them to recognize the red flags as early on as possible. Because as soon as a child, any child, starts expressing or showing a symptom display of attachment dysfunction, you're talking about a psychiatric emergency. It can be literally weeks between a child first resisting contact with a formerly much loved parent and complete alienation where they never want to see them again. It can happen in weeks. So raising awareness and getting early warning signals out there, people understanding what the red flags are, understanding what this actually is, which is a form of psychological child abuse and indeed domestic abuse of the victim parent, then we'll be able to start coming up with solutions. There will be no solutions whilst we allow certain people, certain ministers, certain victims commissioners in the UK to suggest that it doesn't exist, because that's nonsense. It does, and we have all the evidence. They're just not interested in looking at it.
That's a shame because this is your this is all our future. These children growing up right now, this is our future, and they're being psychologically manipulated and destroyed by an alienating parent.
It is a tragedy, because children, all children, want both parents. They love both parents. And in the absence of abuse, where those parents have played a key part in that child's life up until separation or divorce, for them to then have to relinquish, feel that they're forced to relinquish one loved parent in order to regulate the emotions of the other parent is an absolute tragedy. Because we're talking to adults who were alienated as children. We've interviewed quite a few, and they all tell the same story. One, extreme guilt that they turned against a loved parent, sometimes bore witness in court against a loved parent when they actually love that parent with all their heart. Suicide ideation, because they feel worthless. Because when you denigrate a parent of whom you are half of, you denigrate the child. And that's something we're missing. Alienating parents are missing in their desire to take exclusive possession of a child and use them as a weapon of revenge against an ex-partner for whatever reason. You effectively tell that child that half of who they are is unworthy, is unlovable. And that does huge damage. Alcohol and drug abuse, promiscuity, particularly among girls, because when they have a daddy figure removed from their life, they have no role model. And they seek that love that's been stolen from them in the arms of other men. Quite often choosing, making poor choices, and ending up with the people that don't actually love them because they don't feel that they deserve to be loved. I mean, the whole thing is an utter tragedy, because what we're talking about here, at the base, at the core of this issue, is the removal of love. We all need love. We thrive on love as much as plants need sun, and oceans need photosynthesis. We need love. and we are removing love from children, and then wondering why in the UK, 1 in 6 children have a mental health disorder. 1 in 6. And 27% of young women, according to our NHS study in 2020, young women aged 17 to 22, 27% have a probable mental health disorder. They will soon be mothers.
Mm-hmm.
We're creating transgenerational trauma and problems that if we don't stop this right now, we are marching collectively as a world towards the abyss. So we need to speak out, and we will speak out.
You're absolutely right, and I'm so glad you are. There's so many children out there that are walking around school, they're not smiling, they're miserable, and they don't know why. You know, maybe some of them have it figured out, but a lot of them don't. And as you said, they are entering into promiscuity and making poor choices. And I don't know, I think the schools are also failing these children as well.
They are, but you know, in the schools, many who work in schools, I've worked with many teachers on different other programs, and you know, they become teachers because they love kids, they love education, they're really good as teachers. The issue is that they don't understand what they're looking at, and therefore they make the wrong decision. If you don't know what the problem is, you can't come up with the right solution. Mm. I experienced that myself when I asked to see a head teacher, because the little boy who was refusing to go with a father that he loved with all his heart kept repeating like a mantra that his father thought that he, the child, was ruining his dad's life, because that's what had been repeated to him consistently, to the point where he couldn't enjoy that relationship that he'd enjoyed prior to split. And I remember saying to the head teacher, what are you going to do about this? Because if this child was sitting there with a broken arm or leg, mm-hmm. you would have safeguarding here today. Just because his bruises are internal does not mean that he's not equally damaged. We're effectively killing children from the inside out. Mm-hmm. Now, I recognize that 40 years ago, it took about 40 years ago before sexual abuse of children was recognized, and maybe about 20 years ago that physical abuse of children was recognized. We now, as a collective society, a compassionate society, recognize that psychological abuse is equally, if not more, damaging to children, because you may not see the scars, but they are there. And alienated children who now are adults will tell you that they have a lifetime of trauma, lifetime of guilt. Many of them have to have years of therapy to get over what happened to them as children. We have to listen to them. No one else. No one else can tell you about this trauma other than the children who've suffered it, and we're not even listening to them. So those who say we're here to have children and protect them are not listening, and they are effectively complicit in their abuse.
Mm-hmm. And you watch this happen, and I don't know how educated some of these teachers are, much less judges. We don't, you know, they just stay out of it. Because I had an incident myself, and I was trying to explain to the principal, and he said, "Oh, I don't want to get involved." So they're adding to the problem, and they're aiding and abetting these alienators.
They are. I think the problem we have is that judges are not trained in attachment pathology. Mm-hmm. They're trained in law. So they look at precedents. Now, again, if we look at the UK, there is burgeoning proof of parental alienation in our courts. We've already seen it. We have a system called Bailey where judgments will be put up. And quite often, We have judges apologizing to good, healthy, affectionately available parents who've spent up to 300,000 trying to protect their children, trying to protect the relationship with their children, and saying, you are unimpeachable and we're really sorry, but it's too late now because the children are so alienated, they will not come to you. They're likely to run away. Mm-hmm. Now that firstly is false, because we have evidence of children who've been alienated for years still being able to reunite with parents. And the message of hope I'd like to give to victim parents, I don't call them target parents, I call them victim parents. They are victims of the most brutal abuse that could ever befall anyone. And I say this as a survivor. You know, I'm married at 17. I was almost dead by 18. I understand the imperative of protecting genuine victims from domestic abuse. I was that woman. Mm-hmm. And I went to court to get supervised contact only for my late husband, who was subsequently diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. He was dangerous to myself and also to our daughter. And I wanted supervised contact only to protect her. So I understand the imperative of protecting children and victims from harm. But I have to say that I would have rather been beaten again and again by him, as I was, than to have ever lost my child. Mm-hmm. That is worse than death, to lose your child. Mm-hmm. And we are seeing it on an endemic, systemic scale that is just breathtaking. I still cannot comprehend how this is not being addressed, because it's destroying parents, it's destroying children. Mm-hmm. And judges need to be trained in parental alienation for sure, but they need to bring in qualified health professionals to do the diagnosis for the healthcare plan, because you need clinical psychologists, family system therapists to identify the issue. Mm-hmm. And then they work, there's an interlock between health and law. Mm-hmm. That's how we move this forward. But really, we need to address it before it even gets to court. We mm-hmm. need to be teaching boys and girls how to manage, how to build resilience, so that if their parents split and they're being used as a pawn, that they know how to manage that and who to go to. And we need to be teaching young people how to choose partners very, very carefully, because the red flags are there from the very outset. But unfortunately, you know, we have a certain permissiveness in our society where, you know, you may sleep with someone really quickly and the chemical effects can cloud the judgment. Mm-hmm. And so I urge caution for young women and young men to just hold back a little, to look at the person that you may be considering having a long-term relationship with. Certainly before you have children with them, look for any red flags, because they're usually there. And when you know what you're looking for, they're really clear. Mm-hmm. And think again about whether you want to have a relationship and particularly have children with them, because someone who has issues in their past will quite often reenact those in the future. And you need to know what you're getting yourself into, because I've seen so many decimated parents, men and women, because this is not a gender issue, no matter how many times we're told it, mm-hmm. who have their only fault is that they've chosen the wrong partner, and they mm-hmm. pay for it literally with their lives.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you totally. And I think they should be also teaching the personality disorder structures in schools.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know why they're, I guess some schools over here are, but not all of them. Mm. And the United States has recently come out with a film called Erasing Family. I don't know if you got that.
I have. Yeah, it's very powerful.
Mm-hmm. And people are trying to get that into the school systems as well. Yeah. Because somebody must know somebody who knows somebody going through this, or they have a friend going through this and they don't know why their friend is miserable and upset, maybe they could get them some type of help.
The thing is, what's really interesting, in all the other campaigns that we've ever addressed, we've always got media coverage because we do our homework, we go out with the issues, we issue press releases, and I've done, not that I really like talking to camera, I'm actually ironically an introvert, but I've spoken with TV, radio, lots of different media on different issues. When we started researching into parental alienation, we put a survey, we hired an independent researcher to devise the questions and to run those by our task force of experts and also victim parents. And we put it on a relatively innocuous child safety site where we talk to what you would say, and I'm using inverted commas, normal parents. It wasn't initially on an alienating sites, where victim parents, hide because of obviously court orders. They can't be seen to be overtly talking about their issues, which is another problem, of course, is that it's all hidden. This misery and devastation is hidden. Anyway, we ran this survey on our child seat site, Good Egg Safety child seat site, and we were inundated. We had over 2,000 responses, more than 1,500 from the UK. Over half of them, 850 plus, agreed to have their details shared so that if there were any further validation to be done by government officials, they were happy to be included. And we had almost half of them hadn't seen their children for more than 6 months. Mm. The respondents were almost equal in gender, 56% male, 43% women. Now, I would say that because in the UK, 93% of mothers generally get residency orders, parental alienation may be more prevalent by women to fathers, but there are still thousands of mothers who are equally alienated. So it isn't a gendered issue. It's more of an issue of power and control, and it's generally the resident parent. And the reason I say that is there's been research done comparing the UK with Nigeria. And in Nigeria, it's the opposite. Fathers generally get residency, and they are therefore more likely to alienate the mothers. So it shows you it's not a gendered issue. It's a cultural issue, and it's a residency issue because really parents should be getting half and half because they're parents. But from this research that we did, 80% had serious mental health issues, not surprisingly, because their children had been effectively abducted from them. And if anyone wants to just think a bit more deeply about that, imagine as a parent that your children go missing in a shopping mall or in a park. Just remember, because it happens to all of us, that moment of absolute sheer panic when you wonder where your child is, and of course wonder if they've been abducted. And the sheer relief that can make you almost cry when you get reunited with them. And then think about a safe, loving parent who's been very active in a child's life up until separation or divorce. That child is effectively abducted from them. And there's no difference between abduction into a different country or abduction when they just live around the corner. You still cannot get to them. You cannot ring the police. You cannot ring anyone to say, like, I need to see my child. They live with that sheer panic, terror, consistently, not just for hours, days, weeks, months, years. And we allow that to happen. Mm-hmm. That's what we're looking at here, right. The abduction of children, where one parent, either male, could be a father or a mother, takes exclusive possession of a child and eradicates the other parent or uses that child as a weapon of revenge. That's what we're looking at here. Mm-hmm. That's what parental alienation means.
Also, these parents have cases of post-traumatic stress disorder, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, because they've been run through the ringer not only by that parent, and now they're going through the court system, and now they're finding out that their child does not want anything to do with them. It's very disgusting.
It is, it's grotesque. And of course, the victim parents are traumatized and they, run out of money, many of them. I've seen parents who've remortgaged their homes, cashed in pension, sold a car, given all their savings. They've given everything to protect their children, to protect the relationship that they previously enjoyed with their children, to then find that the child has become so submerged by the alienating parents' pathology that they're effectively psychological hostages. They cannot say what's deep in their hearts. But again, I want to say, children do not reject parents, even abusive parents. They do not reject them. And that's something we've got to get out really clearly. Social workers will tell you when they remove children for their own best interests into foster care, those children cry and yearn to be back with their abusive parents. And we only have to look at our evolution. Children, if they rejected a parent, were in danger of being eaten by predators. So the attachment bond is really strong. Children do not reject parents the way alienated children do. If they have an abusive parent, and it's important that we do listen to them, if that other parent is being abusive in a different way, physically, sexually, or whatever, then they still want that parent, but they want the abuse to stop, which is the same with an abused spouse. As a survivor, I initially just wanted the abuse to stop because there's love there and you hope that it'll stop. Of course, it never does. Children want the abuse to stop, but they still love that parent. So we have to fix it for them. But alienated children present in a completely different way to those who have been, who are estranged, because that's the difference. Parental alienation is unjustified rejection. Estrangement is what we would term justified rejection. The presentation is entirely different. And if you know what you're looking for, it's really, really clear.
Good point. That was well said. That needs to be, just said all the time. People will get estrangement and parental alienation interchanged, and it's not. And I've tried. Right. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you're absolutely right. And Dr. Kirk Weir in the UK did a lot of work. He worked with thousands of children in public law, children who needed to be removed from an abusive, dysfunctional family into foster care for their own safety. He then moved into private law, and he said the difference with alienated children was profound, because alienated children manifest behaviors that are not consistent with normal range attachment behaviors. They, the denigration of the parent, they become seemingly very cruel. They lack empathy. They show protest behaviors. That, of course, is their grief. That's not caused by an alienating the victim parent very often. It's their grief at being separated from a loved parent. So these behaviors manifest, and no one is looking at that and understanding that that is a sign of alienation. I mean, I was listening to a presentation that Dr. Childress, a leading clinical psychologist, was giving. And he was saying, if you look at the DSM-5, which is this, the diagnostic model that everyone needs to follow, the reference he uses is child psychological abuse, V995 91, which is effectively the non-accidental injury caused either by symbolic acts or verbal acts by a parent, a child's parent or caregiver, that will result in significant psychological harm to the child. Mm-hmm. That is already in the DSM-5. He also refers to the persecutory delusion, because the question is, because the attachment bond that children have ordinarily with parents is so strong, how is it that an alienating parent is able to suppress that? And they suppress that by creating a persecutory delusion in the mind of the child that creates a victimization. The child believes that they become a victim. They're told that the parent doesn't love them, doesn't care about them, doesn't want them, prefers their sibling. Whatever the story is, or in the case that I witnessed, that the parent thinks the child is ruining that parent's life. And it creates a persecutory delusion. It's in the World Health Organization ICD index, F24. A persecutory delusion in a child in order to use a child as a weapon of revenge is psychological child abuse. So we already have it. Those that say that parental alienation doesn't exist, it is a descriptive term, but the behaviors are well evidenced in both the DSM and the ICD. Mm-hmm. And so therefore what we're looking at is we're looking at an urgent mental health issue that needs to be expedited as quickly as any other form of abuse. Mm-hmm. And if we were to do that, well, if we were to stop it happening in the first place, of course, and through education, but if we were to do that in our courts and address it quickly and clearly, so that parents don't have to keep going back because their orders are breached, because less than 1% of child arrangement orders made in a child's best interest are actually enforced, then we wouldn't be seeing the problems that we're seeing. Mm-hmm.
And these red flags, you really don't know who you're marrying until maybe 3 years in, and this person just starts showing their true colors as well.
Yeah.
And that's very deceptive. And then, your marriage may have their ups and downs, and you're thinking, well, it's going okay. So then you go and have a child. Then it could start spiraling down because that parent maybe can't handle the stress of a family. And then they get divorced, and then it just goes downhill from there. Yeah. And also, there's also third-party interference. You could have parents that are co-parenting very well, and a third party can come in and say, well, I'd be doing this, or you should be doing that. I take them back to court for this. And people have got to stand strong and say, you stay out of it. This is between him and me, her and me, whatever, and just stay out of it. It's working fine as it is. And I don't know, some people can't do that. I don't know. They just don't have the strength. I don't know what it is.
I think the challenge is that because people generally don't understand what it is, we all understand now the importance of protecting children from psychological abuse, physical abuse. If you saw a parent suddenly hammering a child in a store, you'd call the police and report them. Many bystanders will watch a child suddenly look like they are rejecting a parent. They'll cling to the so-called favored parent and start to cry at collection points and assume that the victim parent has done something terribly wrong. So the victim parent doesn't just lose their children, but they're also further victim blamed. Mm-hmm. They must have done something wrong. There's no smoke without fire. Mm-hmm. And they quite often suffer the community's rejection. Friends that used to be joint friends of the couple suddenly take the side of the alienating parent, who are quite often master manipulators. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's no surprise that there's a much higher prevalence of borderline personality disorder and strong narcissistic traits with any parent that will put their needs ahead of their children's healthy needs and will utilize that child as a pawn. Because healthy parents wouldn't do that. I mean, they wouldn't even dream of doing that. And we often say we work with thousands of victim parents, you know, to tell others, if you ever hear someone say when you're separating, if you don't do this, you'll never see the children again, to take that really seriously. Because a healthy parent wouldn't even think it, let alone articulate it. But with the bystanders don't realize that that is not a normal symptom display of a child suddenly clinging with one parent and refusing to go with another. Because children do not do that. And the only way that a child would display attachment suppression behaviors is if the parent with the main care, right, so that's often the resident parent, is manipulating them. It wouldn't happen otherwise. Children do not reject parents. Even children who are with abusive parents do not reject parents. And the other key message to get across is that, generally speaking, you know, they talk about parental alienation being brought by abusive fathers to further victimize mothers. Now, of course, there will be some cases where that will be prevalent because people can and do lie in court. But primarily, in our experience with the thousands we work with, abusers do not call the alienation card. They actually alienate. They're the ones that do the alienation. Yeah.
And I've also seen their attorneys help them.
Well, unfortunately, there's a lot of money made in this industry. And there are two reasons why this psychological child abuse continues. One, vested interests, a lot of financial vested interests. And two, gendered ideology. Those two create a perfect storm that allow our children and our future generation to be psychologically harmed. So yes, we have the privilege of working with many brilliant lawyers and barristers and indeed judges. So I wouldn't say that every lawyer out there is only interested in funding. That would be unfair and completely wrong. There are many who are extremely concerned and who see it every day in their offices. But undoubtedly, there are some who are on the bandwagon of, you know, abuse, where they are encouraging mothers to bring cases of abuse against an errant father. We have the evidence of that too, where they're being coached on what to say, what not to say. The ex parte non-molestation orders have been, we've seen an explosion of them in the UK. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but if you just look at the stats, I keep going back to the evidence. Let's look at the stats. Domestic abuse in the UK has halved in the last decade. Yeah, halved. So we should be patting ourselves on the back, you know, the agencies are doing a great job, the ministers who are supporting it doing a great job, because domestic abuse instances have halved. Yet, when we look at the family court and do a freedom of information request, we're seeing hundreds of percentage increases in non-molestation ex parte orders. One family court alone in the UK has shown a 2,918% increase in non-molestation orders. How? Where's that come from? And then you look at the FOIs across the country, and you'll see in some areas, in some family courts, it's incredibly prolific. In other areas, like Wales, it's not. So are we saying that domestic abuse only occurs in these areas? That would be nonsensical, because abuse, i.e., is not gendered, and abuse, you know, knows no geographical boundaries. It can happen anywhere to anyone, irrespective of gender, race, or creed. So you only have to look at the evidence to see that. And our former head of the family division, James Mumby, Sir James Mumby, said, we know that people are gaming the system and raising false allegations of abuse. We know that people are raising false allegations of abuse against a safe parent false allegations that are embedded in those children's minds. Remember, children quite often can't differentiate between real abuse and actual abuse.
Mhm.
We know they're stealing resources from genuine victims. And as a survivor, that renders me incandescent. Every time you get the police out, you're stealing resources from real victims who need the police,
Right.
who need the funding. We know, he says. And yet nothing has been done to address it. Why? There is no accountability. You can raise false allegations with impunity, and there is no accountability. We have parents that we're working with who've had as many as 80, 90 allegations raised against them in separate court hearings, all NFA'd by the police, yet no action taken against the parent who raises it. So they keep throwing in the allegations, hoping that something will stick. One child confessed to his father that his mother had said that he had to raise an allegation to the grandmother first, then the grandfather, and then an aunt, and tell each of them that he had heard his father say that he was going to kill his mother. This child confessed it to the father. And when he contacted social services to alert them, they went, "Don't worry, we know the children's telling lies." "Don't worry," they said. "We know the child's telling lies." Yet that mother is trying to tell the child to tell lies, not just lies, but to tell people that the father's going to kill the mother. My God. And they discount that. The stories we hear makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. And we're allowing this to happen? It's outrageous. But we will raise visibility. We will play this out. And those who have denied the existence of alienation will be shamed. We expect those in public office who are funded by taxpayers and discount this, who refuse to listen to victims. We expect them to resign or be voted out of power, because this is a huge issue. And they are effectively enabling it by refusing to look at the evidence.
Oh, so well said. I have no words because you said it all. And I myself was a victim of false allegations, and I was exonerated of them, but they stuck. Even though, a parent can be exonerated of false accusations of, say, emotional child abuse or whatever abuse, it will still stick in family court. That family court judge will still believe those accusations.
And I'm so sorry to hear that. I really am. Look, what we're trying to do here, the accusations that have been leveled against me for daring to stick my head above the parapet, because I have to say I've had more personal and professional attacks in the last year and a half that I've had in a lifetime. I've been accused of being a men's rights activist. I've been accused of housing abusers. I mean, you name it, we've had it. If I'm anything, I'm a child's rights activist. Yeah, I happen to love children, and I believe that they deserve our protection. And if we don't protect them, we are failing them, which is unacceptable. It's unforgivable. But what I would say is that any parent that alienates a child from their co-parent themselves probably has suffered trauma at some point. They may be reenacting what Dr. Childress refers to as reenacting childhood trauma. One of the cases where there was clear alienation, the mother had lost her own father when she was 8. I think he'd walked out of the family home to go and live with the mistress. And at that time, her mother became pregnant in her early 40s with a late and surprise baby. So she went from being the youngest adored child in a 2-parent family to a middle child in a single-parent family with a very distressed and distracted mother. So her subsequent alienation was no doubt caused by a fear of abandonment by the children. If that had just been identified she could have been given the support, the help to understand that the father in that case was not trying to remove the children from her, just to give them love. And by alienating the children, she was actually causing them incredible harm.
Mhm.
I have no doubt that in that case, that mother loved her children, but her actions were not loving to them. And so there was a quote yesterday, actually, from Dorsey Pruter, who we've also worked with in our new survival guide. We must learn to integrate family, not eliminate family.
Mhm.
And if there is trauma in the background, we need to identify what they are. We need to basically have a proper diagnostic checklist so that we can protect children, so we can recognize the associated clinical signs of alienation, attachment suppression, so that we can recognize it, we can treat it as a whole family solution, because children need both parents.
Mhm.
We have never said that we want, alienating parents thrown in jail. No, we've never said that. We want them to be held accountable, for sure. And we want them to be penalized for it, for sure. We certainly want those who raise false allegations to be held accountable.
Mhm.
But ultimately, we want children to be able to enjoy both parents and not to be put in the perverse loyalty binds they currently are when they're being alienated.
Well said. Well, I'm so glad I had you on. I won't keep you any further because I know you're a very busy lady. How can people reach you if they have any questions?
We set up a website, which is Parental Alienation UK.info. We have interviews with alienated children, with victim parents, and with many experts to raise visibility. So that's all, and also our media interviews are all on that site. So that's parentalalienation.uk.info. We also have our social media pages. So that's at P Alienation UK. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, and yeah, they can find us there. If a parent is being alienated, firstly, I want them to know they have my utmost sympathy. There are many very good people, far greater brains than mine, that are working around the clock to bring solutions to you, and to hang in there, because children don't suddenly stop loving you. All the adults that we have interviewed actually have reunified with their victim parents, and actually many of them have then rejected the alienating parent, because when they understand how they were manipulated, how they lost, as one said, 20 years of a childhood through falsehood, quite often they end up rejecting that parent. That's the irony. Nobody wins here.
Mm-mm.
No one wins, and particularly the child. The child always loses.
Mhm.
So hang on to your hope. There is help out there. We've produced a report, a 48-page report that 3 judges now have accepted with court bundles, and have made findings of parental alienation, which is encouraging. We've also produced a 108-page survival guide, and that gives you all the ammunition, everything you need to know about how to recognize the flags, what it actually is, what the myths and misconceptions are. Obviously, you're in America, so we do talk about the UK court system, but there's much in there. All the feedback we've had has been very encouraging and quite humbling. But we put that together because we get inundated, hundreds of requests, and I found myself on the phone for an hour and a half each time. And I want to help everyone, I really do, but it made it simpler to put it all into this document, and that's the survival guide. There is a cost. I wish it were free. We've worked free for 2 years. And the reason there's a small cost is simply because we're trying to raise funds to then buy TV and radio to raise visibility in the general public. Because once the general public understand this, they will be outraged.
Mhm.
And I'm looking to create societal outrage, rightful societal outrage. So those who block this, who've refused to recognize it, who've corrupted the term, that bright light will shine on them for encouraging and enabling psychological child abuse. And the way we do that is we raise public understanding, like any other campaign, like social smoking, like domestic abuse, other forms of domestic abuse. We need to raise awareness, and we will do that. We will not stop. Just know that. We and our partners and those wonderful people that we have the privilege of working with, we will not stop until this is recognized.
Okay.
So
And that's
there.
definitely, thank you. And the survival guide can be found on the Parental Alienation UK.info.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank
It's
you
also on
so.
Amazon. It's on Amazon
Oh,
UK as well.
okay. And so it's called a survival guide, or how is it?
Yeah, it's Survival Guide to Parental Alienation by Good Egg Safety.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'd like to have you back on in the future with some more
Okay.
updates if you want.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Okay, Slam the Gavel is a podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in the family courtrooms that in turn perpetuate parental alienation. I'm your host, Marianne Petrie, author of Dismantling Family Court Corruption, Why Taking the Kids Was Not Enough, and Cry Out for Justice, Poems of Truth. Please join us again with Janis and other guests in the future. So thank you again, Janis.
My pleasure. Thank you for giving us a platform.
Definitely.